Uh, Hi, everybody. Welcome to the More Perfect Union. I'd like to welcome now to the show former WCCO news anchor and current author Liz Collin. She's here to discuss her latest endeavor, They're Lying, The Media, the Left, and the Death of George Floyd, which is currently available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other booksellers. Welcome, Ms. Collin.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for the benefit of our audience, give us a little bit of background. I said that you're a former WCCO news anchor, but you have a kind of a broad breadth of experience in the media industry. Can you give us a little bit of a rundown?
Yeah, so I'm a Worthington, Minnesota native, Minnesota kid. Grew up there and always dreamed of being a television reporter, as crazy as that sounds. But I was about 5 years old when I kind of became addicted to the news in a way, and just always told people like, "Hey, that's what I'm going to do someday." When I would watch the news. So I went to college in Florida, where I got just an associate's degree. Went to a broadcasting school in Fort Lauderdale, and I started as a news anchor in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, when I was 19. And I anchored there for a couple years, then went to Wichita, Kansas, where I anchored a morning show there at a CBS station for 3 years. And I also went to college in the afternoon, where I got my bachelor's degree in communications. From there, I was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for a couple years as a reporter at the CBS station and a weekend anchor there too, before I came back home to Minnesota to land at the time what I thought was my dream job at WCCO television back in 2008. I was the weekend anchor there, kind of the main fill-in anchor. Familiar face, was around for a while, and I spent 14 years there before I left. Just about a year ago now, I work at a place called Alpha News now, but partly in the book, I cover why I left and what the mainstream media, sadly, has become today, and I witnessed it firsthand.
Okay, so to get into your book, for those in America who those few in America who haven't heard of George Floyd or didn't see anything beyond the superficial news coverage of the riots and the basic news reporting, what does your book do to kind of shed more light on those events?
Yeah, so just to give your listeners some background, I am married to the then he was the president of the Minneapolis Police Federation, basically the union that represents Minneapolis cops. Bob Kroll is his name, a longtime lieutenant for the Minneapolis Police Department. But he was in this position at the time, so I witnessed all of this through the eyes of my relationship, obviously, with my husband, what was going on within the department, and also what was happening in the newsroom. Our world changed on in that month of May of 2020, right after Memorial Day, and I sort of walk readers through minute by minute what happened in the beginning, all the way through the trial, and basically the consequences we're living now because of these lies that the media helped to push, and the politicians pushed from day one. And I wanted to go ahead and name names and tell the stories that haven't been told, and give the people a voice, like the police officers trapped in the third precinct as it's surrendered to peaceful protesters that night during the riots. I just wanted to give these people a voice because their story hadn't been told.
So, as a news reporter, and somebody who's been involved in journalism, I think your book reads like your book reads like it's a bit of investigative journalism and stuff like that, and you go into a lot of backstory for some of the key players. Can you tell us a little bit about Jacob Fry and Messrs. Ellison, which would be Jeremiah, I guess, as a city council member, and then the Attorney General Keith Ellison, and what sort of their background is, and how you kind of paint the picture of how they bring that experience into how they dealt with the case, or with the events that surrounded the case of Jeremy Ellison.
Yeah, I think that was so important from the very beginning. In Minnesota, we had the perfect people in the perfect positions for this to play out here, and the media wouldn't look, didn't look into their backgrounds. It would drive me crazy when I would talk about, Well, let's take a look at Keith Ellison. He's the top, law enforcement officer, if you will, for the state of Minnesota now as the attorney general. He hates the police. It's well documented that he does. But for some reason, that narrative, would not come up through all of this. Let's take a look at Jacob Fry, a civil rights attorney. That was his job before. Plucked from the East Coast to move to Minneapolis, be a city council member, and take over as mayor. This is someone who behind the scenes is promising the police department, I'm going to bring on, dozens of new cops, 100, 200 cops. We want to get you guys to, 1,000, 1,200 police officers because of the population of Minneapolis. But meanwhile, don't support me publicly. I don't want police support publicly. But this happens, and he immediately, because of his his background as a civil rights attorney, and he'd been painting police as racists from the very beginning. Many would say, what kind of PR strategy is that? You're kind of in charge of this police department. But this George Floyd incident wasn't the first time that he brought up race. This is something that he did again and again with the narrative, even though nobody wanted to critically think about this case from the start. You have a group of mixed race officers, who responded that day to George Floyd passing a counterfeit bill. I think it's easily forgotten for many people, that this all started with a crime that George Floyd committed, and police were called there. They didn't just roll up and this all happened. So there were just many things in many of these backgrounds that I thought were so important to bring up because they hadn't before.
So in your book, with respect to Attorney General Ellison, you talked about how he has publicly spoken in the past about the effect of the 1992 riots in Los Angeles that were related to the Rodney King incident and the acquittal of the 4 white officers there. Do you think that's a precursor driver for a lot of his anti-police rhetoric, his sort of belief?
Oh, it's very much on the record, his feelings and thoughts of law enforcement from the time he was a college student. There's many quotes in the Star Tribune, all available online as part of the public record. Many papers actually across Minnesota. There's a connection also to the Jerry Hoff execution. This was a Minneapolis police officer executed at the Pizza Shack, and Keith Ellison represented one of the associates involved in this execution of a police officer, talking about how we don't need to paint them in a bad light, and also how Black people don't need to follow the laws because they're not treated like citizens of this country, and many inflammatory statements that he's made over the years. And this, in a way, I think was his way of, and he actually publicly stated that there was many things that he said that are very questionable. I would say as a reporter that you should have been asking from the beginning with why he was even saying many things he was saying on the record when it came to this case. It's not the way that the justice system is supposed to work. And I think that overall, the book not only changed policing, changed the way that many of us live in Minnesota with safety, something we actually have to think about now, and something I think we took completely for granted before. But also the story is about this so-called justice system. Mob justice is not justice. And we saw the mob take over in Minnesota. That quickly spread across the country. And again, we're paying the consequences to this day.
In your book, you talk about some of the way the dynamics of the actual trial played out, and the behavior and actions of the prosecution vis-a-vis sharing of information, ethical practices or unethical practices. Can you talk about a few of those things, such as haystacking or creating conflicts of interest, and what effect that might have had, or that the practical effect those things had on the defense preparation?
Yeah, there are so many things. I always say, even with the media, it's not what they're telling you; it's what they're not. And sort of this lies by omission carries over into the courtroom, I believe. And we have a whole section in the book titled, the trial of Derek Chauvin, because the thought is, of course, well, this jury found him guilty. He's guilty. Well, there was a lot more going on when it came to that case, including, we talked to the police officer who was involved with arresting George Floyd nearly a year earlier. This is also something the police administration said, another lie. There are many, but from the very beginning, we've never heard of George Floyd before. We've never had anything to do with him. Well, he was the center of a undercover drug investigation for months, and we talked to the officer who sort of led that all up, and his behavior that day he was arrested a year before. And it's interesting because he was called originally as a witness for the prosecution, and he talked about his interactions with Keith Ellison in preparation for the trial. And Scott Creighton is his name, and he talks about how it's very apparent that the prosecution, Attorney General Ellison, doesn't even want to refer to this as an undercover drug investigation that George Floyd is involved with. So during the trial prep, he says, "Are you, let's talk more about that traffic stop." And you have Scott Creighton on record saying, "Well, it's not a traffic stop. This was a, this is a pre-planned arrest that we're doing of George Floyd, who's passing, thousands of dollars in counterfeit pills." And they quickly dismiss Scott Creighton. They don't want him on their side, as they realize that he's not going to lie and say that this was a traffic stop. This wasn't a regular traffic stop that day. That was in May of 2019. So he quickly becomes the defense, their first witness that they call. But this is an interaction with George Floyd, even from that arrest, that goes on for 20, 30 minutes. And the jury is only allowed a few seconds, I think about 90 seconds of that interaction in total. So again, not what the jury did see, but what they did not. And I kind of go into that again and again. The haystacking situation you mentioned, we spoke to Eric Nelson quite a bit for the book, what was happening behind the scenes with just the documentation. You'd have different documents that were part of this case that they would request, and you have the prosecution dumping them on Eric Nelson, who's only working basically with himself, but a few other people. When
So
you're up against this,
Eric
what's that?
Eric Nelson is Chauvin's defense attorney.
Chauvin's attorney, correct. And this haystacking is basically a way where they make it impossible to actually find the document you're looking for. They rearranged everything, put it in boxes, printed everything off, and then mixed up the documents. And this is something that was put out, but before trial, that they were doing this, but no media would talk about it at all. It received, I don't even think it received any coverage at all. And I just thought this is something, again, that should trouble you as an American citizen of this country looking for justice.
I think one of the interesting things, and I think most people understand what a conflict of interest is, but when, as a prosecutorial strategy, or as a strategy that a lawyer might employ, why is that? Why is the particular way that the prosecution engaged in, according to your book, the way the prosecution engaged in this kind of behavior? What did that do to make it more difficult for the Chauvin defense?
Yeah, and we found out about this through Eric Nelson as well. So this is the prosecution goes to work really from the very beginning, and they call as many medical examiners, from what Eric Nelson told me, as they possibly can. So then when his team goes in to try to find a medical examiner or someone else, a use of force expert, if you will, someone to call for the defense, they can't because this conflict of interest has been created because the prosecution has already talked to them. It's not necessarily that they will be called by the prosecution, but they have had this conversation. This is why you see the prosecution list. It's more than 400 plus this list is that they have on this list. Of course, they didn't end up calling anywhere near that during the trial, but the wider they cast this net, it makes it more difficult for the defense because of this conflict of interest that has been created. So we do talk about that in the book as well.
One of the things I found kind of incredulous was the way that the prosecution seemingly was able to sort of discount their own coroner, and the coroner's report that said that Floyd most likely died because of his hypertension. He had a heart condition. He had high blood pressure, and he was also had consumed for the average person enough fentanyl and methamphetamine that would have been likely fatal to the average person. Now, drug tolerances aside, right? If you're an addict, you build up a tolerance, just like an alcoholic will build up a tolerance to alcohol, and they may not visibly show the effects or whatever. But Floyd was actually arrested a year or so prior, having taken too many drugs. He made a comment in that case that he had taken too many drugs. There was some controversy in the trial about whether or not George Floyd said he ate too many drugs, or he ain't had no drugs, or I can't remember the exact phrase, right? But there was audio that was played. It was pretty it was pretty difficult to sort of play it out one way or the other. And it seems to me like the prosecution was able to sort of make that case that he said he didn't take any drugs. And your book, you actually say that if he had told the truth, because he had taken drugs, they were clearly in his system from the toxicology report. If he had said that he had consumed fentanyl, that might have led to a different response from the police officers at the scene.
Yeah, exactly. We have the officers asking him. They actually ask several times. I'm glad you bring this up, because this is another one of the lies as well. There was a reason that it's just this Facebook video that is released. This has never happened before, where they withhold the officer's body camera footage. There's 4 officers. They're all rolling on this whole situation. They're not trying to hide this at all. But again, this is a move by the city of Minneapolis, the police chief, and also Keith Ellison, I believe, more than anyone else, who decides to withhold this body camera footage, because this is where you hear those conversations. The officers are asking him, "What are you on?" They're asking his friends, "What's he on?" He's saying nothing. I'm not on anything. I didn't take anything. But this is also during this body camera footage, which again, we don't even find out about until a couple months later, after it's leaked by one media source. Otherwise, you have to basically go to the courthouse, sign a log to look at the footage, and that's how it's disseminated to the public. It was just completely crazy. But this is when you see for yourself that George Floyd is saying he has trouble breathing long before Derek Chauvin even shows up.
And this is also relevant to his prior arrest for the drug possession before, drug dealing before.
Right. If you would play both of these videos
while he was sitting in the vehicle.
Right. If you play these videos back to back, they're eerily similar. This had clearly happened before, and that's in the book itself. They're lying. I think it's page 88, 89. We have about 13. I would consider pretty critical, just different sentences that are taken out of the actual medical examiner's report from Hennepin County. This is Dr. Andrew Baker, who's the medical examiner in Hennepin County at the time, and still is. And, this is the no strangulation marks. This is the fact that if he were alone, he would have died of a drug overdose. Just some really critical statements that were glossed over. And also, just another note, the autopsy for George Floyd is conducted the day after he dies. It's actually within 12 hours of his death, and they wait to release that for a week. This is after part of Minneapolis burns to the ground. You have to also ask, why did they wait so long? They also wait to release a second autopsy. George Floyd's family had hired a couple medical examiners at that point to do their own autopsy. It kind of contradicts Dr. Baker's a bit, but they released them nearly at the same time. And you have the media going ahead and talking about this independent autopsy that says something else. And the independent autopsy is anything but. This is a autopsy, bought and paid for by George Floyd's family.
Sure. We talk about trial procedure, the court of law, and how when you are charged with a crime, you are innocent until you're presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and there is a legal process by which that is adjudicated. In the court of public opinion, however, is something that's completely sort of like the old Wild West. And I'd like to just take a couple of minutes and just have you talk a little bit about the pretrial publicity, the effect of social media, comments that Chief Arredondo made, comments that Keith Ellison made, Jeremiah Ellison, other news reports in the press, and then also as the jury was being seated, the effect of the city announcing the civil lawsuit judgment for $27 million before the trial had even begun.
Yeah, I mean, it's really even looking back, it's just wild the timeline how this all transpired, and again, this is supposed to be where we put our confidence in the judicial system, right? The fact that this was even allowed to take place in Hennepin County, the trial itself. This is partly why Derek Chauvin is appealing this case. Much to do about just the venue itself, but yeah, there are just so many things so many questions that need still, I believe, answering as far as this goes. I think Chief Arredondo is another example. You have him reaching out to community and church groups after this happens within hours. Still to this day, he's never talked to any of the officers who were actually involved. I know that because I've been in touch with many of their families, and he didn't want to know what actually happened. We know just through transcripts and such that it's very possible that he never even watched the body camera footage. And Chief Arredondo himself had, I think, an important role in all of this because of his past with the Minneapolis Police Department. He refused to carry a gun, and basically the union came in and saved his job. This was after there was a bank robbery, and he slipped out the back door and didn't have a gun on him during that, and he basically had to call for backup. But he's the one that also, fans the flames of racism through all of this. And and again, isn't acknowledging the fact that, a black police officer interacted more with George Floyd that day than a white police officer did. He's not acknowledging the fact that, a Hmong American officer is on scene as well. And again, it's this um, black and white lens that they're pushing from the very beginning. You have Mayor Fry apologizing to Black America, basically weeping. And again, nothing good comes of these narratives. We know that by history, but more than anything, they lied about all of that. And you have the media going ahead and perpetuating that also, and they didn't seem to care about facts or getting to the bottom of any of this. Just another note, you have, again, the police chief saying no interaction, never heard of George Floyd before. You also have the police chief saying we've never trained like this before, this maneuver, et cetera. Well, that's also interesting because the media knows that, interestingly enough, a few pages of the training manual disappear online, which state this MRT training. It disappears like the day after and mysteriously comes back a few weeks later after they've moved on. But this
And it's
maximum,
modified, right?
what's that?
It was modified after it came back. If you look at the before and after, wasn't it changed?
It was it's changed a little bit now, but this MRT, this maximum restraint technique, is clearly what's going on. And it's still part of training to this day. And you actually have the chief on the stand saying that this isn't a part of training at all. So it really is just absolutely baffling. But so many people got away with the lies. So I guess why not continue to push them?
Yeah, and there was one dichotomy that was associated with the MRT technique, and in one use case of it, there's the instruction is to move over to put them in the side recovery position, and if they weren't taking drugs, I think this is where that comment came in earlier. If they were suspected of ingesting drugs, then they would be placed on their side recovery because of the breathing related issues that can accompany that kind of stuff. But if they weren't suspected of consuming drugs, then that policy is a little ambivalent for that particular thing. The defense, I think, argued. I think they were trying to argue that George Floyd had, because he said he wasn't taking drugs, they didn't think that he had to be placed on in the side recovery position. There was also the body cam footage that you talked about. There was also the discounting of the fact that Chauvin's knee was on his neck. It wasn't on his neck. It was actually on his shoulder blade. But
Right.
because of the angle of the Facebook video, it appeared that he was putting all of his weight down on him. It wasn't a good look. To be fair, it wasn't a good
Oh,
look
of course
for
not.
the police. But it wasn't what they were saying, and there was no way that, based on the body position that Derek Chauvin had, that he was able to restrict this guy's ability to breathe
Yes,
from, you know, choking
absolutely,
him off at the neck.
right, and that's backed up by the medical documents as well. And no, I'm glad you brought that up also. And this is when we have Chief Arredondo on the stand saying that he'd never seen the video before, and it's much more clear in the body camera footage, the positioning of the knee. And again, another reason that they kept that hidden.
So I want to move forward a little bit. So as we're going through the trial, and the case goes out to the jury, there was another event that involved a police officer shooting of a black man, Dante Wright. Kim Potter was the officer in that case. She mistakenly fired her service weapon, meaning to pull a taser. There were comments that were made by a number of people in that particular thing. Do you think the court of public opinion that surrounded like the riots and the case, the Chauvin case itself, do you think that one second, do you think that created an opportunity to prejudice public opinion and sentiment towards the Kim Potter case, and vice versa? Do you think that what was going on with Kim Potter, because the Chauvin trial was not over yet, do you think that there was some spillover effect on both of those cases towards one another that led to a negative outcome for both officers?
Oh, absolutely. We have Maxine Waters, who flies in from DC to weigh in, and she's talking about how we're going to stay on the streets. If this verdict doesn't come back. You also have Attorney General Ellison out at the protests in that situation as well. Well, this is all going on with Derek Chauvin in court. So absolutely. And again, Keith Ellison has put 5 police officers behind bars, and and I think that he's basically thrilled with that. It's what he sort of ran on, and that was my goal with the book, was to try to get it out because before the election. And I'll just backing up a bit, I'm not even a political person, but I almost felt like we're in the middle of fighting evil, in my opinion. The fact that people can go ahead and and do this and get away and wield this type of power, I think should scare everyone. And these are people in very powerful positions in this state. So absolutely, that the timing of that couldn't have been worse. And you have Kim Potter, who was is still in prison and will be until April. And her pardon wasn't even heard by the governor or attorney general, who sit on that panel to decide whether or not to let her out early. And that's Minnesota tax dollars hard at work, basically giving her an entire wing of the Shakopee Women's Prison, for a horrible mistake.
Yeah, I think that she kind of got her. I honestly, my personal opinion is, I think she got a raw deal. I think her primary defense on that was that it was a mistake. I think that there was some culpability on her part for pulling, one versus the other, because she was a training officer and things like that. But I think they kind of went hard on her because of the political circumstances surrounding the George Floyd case and the fact that it was an active trial. I think, speaking of Maxine Waters, I think one of her public comments was that if they didn't come back with guilty, she didn't want guilty for manslaughter. She wanted guilty for murder, a charge for which Derek Chauvin was not charged, right? There's some nuances in terms of what is the equivalent crime in varying states, right? Some people call it involuntary or voluntary manslaughter with premeditation or whatever. But she was arguing for murder, and she's also saying you have to confront people. You have to do a lot of things that people have talked about in other cases in political parlance. They talk about people that incite or cause other people to gin up the level of the rhetoric. Maxine Waters is right at the top of the list of all of that. When Donald Trump, not to get too far off the topic, when Donald Trump was in office, she talked about how you have to get up in people's faces and you have to create a scene, and you can't let them rest,
Right.
for lack of a better word. So I think that there is a very significant challenge there when people who are in elected offices or public officials are coming out and actually ginning up the elevated rhetoric, for lack of a better word. I want to kind of move on to the current state of things, right? Chauvin has announced that he's doing an appeal. There's a lot of reasons in your book that he is citing pretrial publicity, some of the ways in which the defense handled or proffered information over to the defense, and so the prosecution proffered information to the defense, and so forth, as well as public statements by Ellison and others. Um, After he was found guilty in Minnesota State Court, he also pled guilty to civil rights violations for the Chauvin case and one other case. And the terms are very similar in terms of the amount of time. Federal rules are going to keep him in jail a lot longer. So even if he is successful on his appeal, he's still going to be in jail for a long time. What is the predominant reason, do you think, that he is filing the appeal in one court if it's not going to have any practical impact on the amount of time he's going to be served? Is that maybe opens the door possibly to a review of the federal case?
It does, yeah, and that's the strategy that they'll probably end up taking this to the U.S. Supreme Court. That's where they think that they'll get the best shot at all of this, and then they will have that window of opportunity to appeal on a federal level. It is very much a long shot, and his new attorney now even acknowledges that as well. It's a steep hill to climb after all that's happened. And these other officers also, they pled guilty because they were like, all right, I guess if we have to do this for 2 or 3 years, it's going to be a lot better than 10, 15, what they would have been likely hit with. They talked to me about how they watched what happened in court with Chauvin, and they don't want to go through that. They didn't think that they, stood a fair chance at all when you have, a jury being let in every day, and there's, the angry mob around them basically threatening not only their livelihood, but their lives if they come to the wrong verdict, in their mind. And that's really an important part of the story as well, talking about this mob. They obviously came after me for my career, my husband, etc., which is, really nothing compared to what they've done to other people and their families as well. And that's part of the tactic, right? Just scare people into submission. And that's what was happening, at the courthouse day in, day out.
I totally see that and I totally understand that point. So in the closing couple of minutes that we've got left here, if you would, tell our audience what you're doing. I know you're promoting the book around, you're doing some speaking engagements, things like that. You also have a blog or a video blog, and you work for Alpha News. Tell us about like your upcoming events and what people are doing.
Yeah. So I'm kind of traveling the state of Minnesota. I kind of go wherever people ask me to go. It's actually been fun. I say it's like free therapy. There's a lot of like-minded people out there, believe it or not. But I just believe in facts and the truth. It's refreshing. But I have a website called thelieexposed.com. So thelieexposed.com, that'll get you to the book. And also I just update stories that have to do with the case and different events as well. I have an event coming up in Hudson next Thursday night. That should be a good time. I think we're 6 to 9 p.m. At Patty Ryan's. So that'll be good. I'm headed to Parker's Prairie. That's tomorrow, Saturday, in Minnesota near Alexandria. But I just update the website with different things going on for the month. And alphanews.org is where I work now. We're kind of a conservative media outlet, but we put a lot of things in print that the mainstream media never dares do. So it's nice to work with kind of uncensored and unafraid people. So it's refreshing.
Ms. Collin, thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed the book. I recommend it to anybody who's looking for more information about some of the nuanced things that went into that trial and how it might alter public perception. Thanks so much for writing it. Thanks so much for giving us the time today on The More Perfect Union.
Thank you very much for having me.
If you like the interview you just watched, join us on twitch.tv/The More Perfect Union for more constitutional and conservative views on politics in the United States. Like or subscribe our YouTube channel as well. Take care.